I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. So on Sunday, we saw this explosive interview given by FBI Director Kash Patel, and he talks about Canada. He's on Fox News, and all of a sudden the conversation goes to Canada. And I wanted to save this topic to talk to with this guest today, Sam Cooper, because Sam, he is the creator of the Bureau and Canada's top investigative journalist. I think Kash Patel may be reading your articles and reading your reports, because when I heard him say this and I saw these videos circulating, I thought this is what Sam has been ringing the alarm about for months, if not longer. So I guess we'll play the clip in a second, Sam, but just tell me, what was your reaction when you saw Kash Patel, the FBI director, making these claims?
Well, my reaction was, as I've been talking to senior U.S. intelligence experts in the recent months, I don't know if it's by their design. I don't think so. I think that they've reached out to me because they say I'm the North American subject expert on these threats that are endangering the United States and Canada. They've been telling me that there was an Iranian state connection, a Chinese sanctioned precursor supplier entity, and Mexican cartels connected to that Falkland superlab. I've also been reporting in the past year, as you know, about Canada Border Services Agency's whistleblower saying that Canada's being exploited by people that are using the Vancouver port. And this is, again, Iranian, Mexican, and Chinese, apparently state actors that may have penetrated Canada's systems, and that, this would be a concern to the U.S. government. So yes, when I saw Kash Patel say, this is what the U.S. government is concerned about, and the U.S. has been working with Mexican authorities to crack down on the southern border, and this will not only send an impetus, or rather this will cause the Mexican cartels to set up more strongly in Canada, and that Canada has not been cooperating. Look, that's what Kash Patel said, and that's what I've been reporting for the past few months. So I don't know if it's him reading my reports or that we are talking to people with the same intelligence. I think that probably the latter.
Well, it tells me that you are hitting the nail on the head, that you have, you're over the target. And here is your report on the Bureau: breaking explosive FBI warning: CCP, Iran, and Mex cartels partnering in Canada to move fentanyl and terrorists into the United States. And then you write that Kash Patel's warning echoes the Bureau's exclusive reporting on criminal convergence linking Chinese-backed chemical suppliers, Iranian proxies, and Mexican cartels operating through Vancouver's super labs. Really, it sounds like the plot of a Hollywood film. It's just like unbelievable that this is happening under our nose. And it's not like we have no idea that it's happening. Obviously, you've been reporting on it. And so it's just like, I don't know if the authorities are asleep at the switch, or if somehow they're in on it, or if they would just rather ignore it. But I do want to play, first we'll play this clip of FBI Director Kash Patel. So he's speaking on Fox News's evening report with Maria Bartiramu. Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly. And he is specifically talking about how they've sealed the southern border. The southern border is secure, but that the fentanyl is still flowing from Canada. Let's play that clip.
In the first 2-3 months that we've been in the seat under Donald Trump's administration, he has sealed the border. He has stopped border crossings. So where's all the fentanyl coming from still? Where's the trafficking coming from still? Where are all the narco traffickers going to keep bringing this stuff into the country? The northern border. Our adversaries have partnered up with the CCP and others, Russia, Iran, on a variety of different criminal enterprises, and they're going and they're sailing around to Vancouver and coming in by air.
Now, Sam, I've had you on my show many times. I think that you said that verbatim on my show maybe 2 months ago about those Vancouver ports. And so, I mean, walk us through that.
Absolutely. That's what I got from Director Patel's statement. I had reported previously, again, a CBSA whistleblower said that there was a massive amount of stolen passports. I believe it was connected to Russia's invasion of Ukraine years ago, and and Canada's government knew that many of those stolen passports were used by threat actors to enter Vancouver's port. I had also told you that Vancouver's port is wide open to fentanyl precursors coming in. Something like only 1% of the containers that come into Vancouver's port, this is the fourth busiest in North America, are searched. And on top of that, I had reported The documented concern, it's been known for years that Chinese organized crime actors with connections to Chinese military entities of the same type that are operative in Panama have significant activity in Vancouver's port, along with Iranian threat actors. And of course, the local Hells Angels are in the mix there too. So it's almost a surreal feeling or sense that we now have the director of the top counterintelligence agency coming out overtly and saying the exact same things I'm reporting. And Candice, I would add, another major story I broke was you'll remember the Danforth shooting of 2018. There were indications that there could be terror links, but the Toronto police and Ralph Goodale, Trudeau's public safety minister, said those indications were false, not supported. Hold on a second. I reported based on a senior former DEA investigator that told me the American government did not buy that conclusion. They found concerning links between the shooter in Toronto and a major carfentanil seizure in a nearby suburb.
His brother, right? I remember the story.
It's a deep story. His brother went into a coma from handling carfentanil. 40 kilograms were seized in a Toronto suburb, largest seizure of carfentanil ever. American authorities wanted just a couple of grams to search it to see, they were concerned, could this be a weapon of mass destruction? Could there be a terror link? They found a linkage to Pakistan that concerned them. The RCMP completely shut them down, would not share a single gram of that seizure. And so what does that point to? I'm told that the US government said, of course, there was a Chinese supplier involved and there could be a Pakistani threat network, and the Canadian government would not cooperate with the US government. So this, in my view, when I was hearing Kash Patel, I almost heard that case resonating without being said.
Well, if we could just take a minute to double click on that, because I was writing and reporting with the Toronto Sun at that time, Sam. And I recall, it's been several years now since I refreshed my memory on the case, but I do remember a police report where they went in and they interviewed the parents. And the two parents of this young man who they claim was mentally ill, even though he was working a job at a local supermarket. So he wasn't like severely mentally ill like the legacy media pretended that he was. But basically his parents were both interviewed, and they were interviewed separately, and their answers contradicted each other. They were asked whether he had spent time in Pakistan, and I believe his father said yes, and his mother said no, he's never been to Pakistan. And then it turned out that he attended a radical mosque in Toronto. He had gone to Pakistan. There was a lot of very disturbing things that the police just refused to look into. The legacy media decided that they were the victims of the Danforth shooting, the family, and that we had to rally around the family of the terrorist, and that we couldn't call him a terrorist. And I remember the point, I've never disclosed this before, but the Toronto Sun, my employer at the time, would not let me report on it anymore because they didn't want me to go down this rabbit hole. They were worried about getting sued. And basically they just said, Joe Warrington's covering the story, no one else can write about it. And I was banned from writing about this story. Even though I think it was a huge public interest, I think that the police were misleading the public, and the legacy media were absolutely complicit in it all.
I'm happy to dive into this with you, Candice, because I didn't cover it at the time, but it did strike me that there were some very concerning indications. People were not even focused on the fentanyl issue at the time, but come on, 33 restricted weapons, 40 kilograms of carfentanil, 100 times more powerful than fentanyl. And you're right, the media, it seemed, came up with the idea that the families were the victims there. And so this is what struck me when a DEA source, we're talking a person that's investigated everyone from terrorists to El Chapo, reached out and said, Sam at the Bureau, you've been hitting the nail on the head in ways that we cannot speak of because this is classified information. The dots you're connecting on the Chinese Communist Party and international threat works are exactly true. And he told me he was very bothered. He pushed through the Pentagon and U.S. intelligence agencies to get more cooperation from the RCMP on that case. And as he told me, multiple times, the U.S. government was shut down by high-level bureaucrats in Ottawa. Other shocking findings. They said they found food dye. That is, the local police at least shared some photos of that seizure. And this led the DEA to believe this product could have been, parceled out for mass trafficking to young people. And yet we never read that in the Canadian media. Another major point, I pressed my source, Donald M. People can look him up. He's an extremely high-level investigator with the DEA. He's worked U.S. military intelligence. He said, Sam, we found links in Pakistan that are extremely concerning. I said, link to terror? He said, I won't tell you any more than it was extremely concerning, indirect links to terror. I'm not sure if anyone is happy that I've reported this, but look, after I broke that story, Candice, I can share this with you as a little bit of news nugget. A Canadian intelligence source reached out to me and said, you are right, there was an ISIS link to that whole case, and it was covered up. The prosecutors didn't want to go after it. I'm not sure if that's a headline. I haven't reported it yet, but since you have background on the story, I think it's fair and the right time for me to share it with you. There's a lot more to this story, and I was told that, of course, we don't know what was brought up in the White House with Mark Carney, Melanie Joly, and Dominic LeBlanc, and our then public safety minister, Mr. McGuinty, and J.D. Vance and President Trump. But I was told that fentanyl case may have come up. I don't know if it did, but I'm told certainly it's of concern.
Well, it's very interesting. And just in case the audience doesn't quite remember, this was a horrific shooting that happened back in 2018 on the Danforth, which is a popular street in basically adjacent to downtown Toronto. It's known as Greektown. And a mentally deranged person came and shot, and it seemed like he was aiming at girls. I think there were 2 young girls that ended up dying from this. And it came out like a day or two later that the shooter, a family spokesperson came out, first of all. This family spokesperson was a known NDP operative, and he came out and said that the shooter was mentally ill. He was deceased, that he was mentally ill, and that it wasn't terrorism, it was just mental illness. And the legacy media just bought that like hook, line, and sinker. And then after that, it was like, no one can talk about this, or you are a racist bigot who's Islamophobic. And again, at the time, it was the Toronto Sun. Look, Joel Warrington is one of the best reporters in Canada, and he did a great job covering this. But the fact that my newspaper didn't want me to be talking about this issue at all. They basically banned me from writing about it. And the more that I was digging, I was also in communication with people in the scene, people who were even relatives of these poor young girls that lost their lives. And people weren't buying what was being sold, but it was all working together. The police chief said none of this Islamophobic stuff. Like anyone even asking questions about the ties to radical Islam that was that we're talking about near the height of ISIS and the Syrian refugee crisis and all that kind of stuff happening, and we were just told to stop talking about it and move on. And it was shocking to see the legacy media just go along with that. I'm so pleased that you kept digging on it, because I did for a while and then I stopped. But I agree that there is a lot more to that story. And I'm glad you brought up the Oval Office exchange as well, because I found this quite interesting, right? During the election campaign, Mark Carney didn't really talk about fentanyl. He didn't really talk about the border. He kind of ignored Donald Trump's prodding on this issue. Actually, we have a clip. First, I'll show this one. This is from February 12th, 2025, when Mark Carney is sort of new to the scene. And he says that Canada does not have a fentanyl crisis. Let's play this clip.
Fentanyl is an absolute crisis in the United States. It's a challenge here, but it's a crisis there.
So totally different tone from Mark Carney after he wins the election. This is him in that Oval Office meeting that you just mentioned with President Trump and J.D. Vance and others on May 6th. And here, Prime Minister Carney is thanking Donald Trump for his leadership and saying that Canada is also focused on cleaning up our border and cleaning up our fentanyl issue. Let's play that clip.
Thank you for your hospitality and above all for your leadership. You're a transformational president, focus on the economy with a relentless focus on the American worker, securing your borders, ending the scourge of fentanyl and other opioids, and securing the world. And I've been elected with my colleagues here, with the help of my colleagues here. I'm going to spread the credit to transform Canada with a similar focus on the economy, securing our borders. Again, on fentanyl, much greater focus on defense and security, securing the Arctic and developing the Arctic. And the history of Canada and the U.S. is we're stronger when we work together, and there's many opportunities to work together. And I look forward to, addressing some of those issues that we have, but also finding those areas of mutual cooperation so we can.
So, Sam, what did you make of Mark Carney's sort of reversal? All of a sudden, he's praising Trump and saying that fentanyl is a big issue after denying it. And I really didn't hear him talk about that much on the campaign trail at all.
It's really a stunning clip because the pretty much every word that Mark Carney said would be something that the Bureau would have written about. And in many podcasts, I would have advocated this is the stance Canada needs to take, or else our sovereignty is in deep danger. We need to acknowledge to the United States that Canada is a big part of the solution here. And, we need to step up to the plate. So essentially, if that was Mark Carney's real intention, I'd be very happy. In fact, I would have thought that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, that was more their campaign message, which Mark Carney just reflected. And as I have a long career in the Canadian media, I would call myself a good analyst of their coverage. I found that Mark Carney, his prime minister's office operatives, and the media that are very friendly with them had the exact opposite of the narrative that he had just said to Donald Trump in that meeting. And that was to deny that Canada is a big problem on fentanyl, to say that the US is unfairly targeting us, and essentially, to use the vernacular, big orange man bad, Canada good. Why is he picking on us? So I just think, really my thoughts are that raises the theme that what we're hearing from Mark Carney, what comes out about his private phone call to President Trump beforehand, telling him, "You're a transformative president. I'm going to be hitting you during the campaign, but don't worry. That's just that's just for the public." Look, I think that's what's happening, and that's what's reflected in those White House comments.
Okay, but I am curious about the action on this, right? So you have Carney in the White House sort of saying to Trump what Trump wants to hear. And then 2 weeks later, you have President Trump's FBI director, Kash Patel, that Trump individually selected, coming out and saying, it's happening. It's happening in your country. All of our adversaries are working together through this port of Vancouver. Like, do you think that Mark Carney will take action? And it's an interesting thing that's happening, right? Like, under the Trudeau government the last decade, the bureaucracy has grown significantly, right? It's not like they have reservations about hiring new government agents, right? Why don't they have more people monitoring these ports of Vancouver? Why is it just 1%? I mean, even after sort of publicly getting humiliated in some ways, like the FBI director calling us out saying, we know what's happening. It's happening right here, guys. Like, get your act together. Do you think that Mark Carney will actually take some action here and start cracking down on this?
I think it will take tremendous and increased pressure from the United States. It's a very complex subject, but if I'm extremely brutally honest, I don't think the Canadian government will take action unless forced even harder by Washington. Why do I say that? I've been told by senior US government sources that for years, in private meetings with elite Canadian officials of the type that, could include Bill Blair, Dominic LeBlanc, senior RCMP, commissioner level, the US government brings up concerns that Mexican cartels have been growing in Canada since the Trudeau government removed visa requirements. And the US government was met with denials and met with sort of polite Canadian handshaking, we'll get on it, and nothing happens. And so when you saw the tariff threats and you see something like $1 billion, the figure was raised in terms of beefing up Canada's border patrol, buying some helicopters. Again, I just think this is press releases and sort of, indications of action that doesn't really lead to results. Why do I say that? In order to really crack down on Chinese Communist Party operatives, which my sources indicate use Canada as command and control for the Western Hemisphere in many ways, and the Mexican cartels and Iranian threat networks that I'm saying are strongly set up in Canadian cities, Canada would have to reform its criminal act and get a sort of an anti-racketeering law. We need to beef up our foreign interference laws. We need to, as I've written, port police were taken out of the Vancouver port. Jean Chrétien's government was warned 20 years ago by an association of police chiefs saying, we've got a major vulnerability. Chinese organized crime and intelligence is taking over in the Vancouver port, and nothing was changed. So those are, I would say, 3 action items that if Mark Carney was really serious, he could come out on, in a big press conference next week and say, we're doing this, this, and this. He could do one of his sort of fake
Fake executive orders.
signing executive orders and saying, we're getting a racketeering law. He'd really have to put it through Parliament, but I would applaud that theater if he did it, because it would show he's really going to act. Right now, I'm sorry to say, I just see the usual liberal sort of nicety, pleasant words, and kicking the can. I don't think that they will crack down on this unless extreme pressure continues to be brought on them.
Well, 100%. And they have their cheerleaders in the legacy media covering it up. I've talked to you about this before, but I just want to remind viewers of this one. So the Globe and Mail was out there, among many other publications, but this is just one that we took. After President Trump said that he was concerned about fentanyl coming in from Canada, here's a Globe and Mail headline. The U.S. is the real source of fentanyl, the fentanyl crisis, not Canada. And then basically in the article, this is written by journalist Marcus G., he writes that the RCMP sees no evidence of this. The claim that the United States is being flooded with fentanyl from Canada, says the RCMP sees no evidence of it, nor do other experts in drug trafficking. Alberta says that if there is a flood, it is flowing in the opposite direction. And so then this narrative came up. This was from March 2025. And basically the idea was that, no, Canada's not the problem at all. And the Globe and Mail and others perpetuating this idea to sort of cover for the Liberals, saying, no, they didn't create the problem. The Americans are lying and the Americans are the problem. Well, Sam, I don't know if you saw our report. We did an analysis of every single story during the election and sense if there was a bias one way or another. And we found that the Globe and Mail was the worst perpetrator of the pro-Carney, anti-Poilievre bias, even worse than the CBC. And so stories like this from the Globe and Mail don't really surprise me at this point. But what do you make of that?
Yeah, I'm glad that you've kind of systematically documented that. In an anecdotal way, of course, I read the big stories. I follow their big columnists. And, I was in that coverage, I was reminded of, in 2015, when I was breaking the news at the Vancouver province that Chinese-based buyers were essentially becoming a major force in the city's real estate. The Globe and Mail came out with a story called "The Myth of the Chinese Buyer," a big headline. And so it just fit into that narrative. No, not happening here. Why do they do it? I don't know if it's kind of progressive-leaning reporters. I don't know if they get pressure from editors. But I do know that, the people writing these columns that Canada doesn't have a big fentanyl problem are not subject matter experts as I am. They're not sourced in policing, military, and intelligence, North America. They're political reporters. So it just makes sense that they buy sort of, in my experience and analysis, when the Prime Minister's office wants to get a narrative out, it'll send someone out to have a coffee or a wine with a big reporter at the CBC and the Globe and Mail. And then that'll lead to, I've become cynical now, you'll see a front page Globe and Mail story, what I call PMO talking notes. Not to say that the Globe and Mail won't do some stories critical of prime ministers. There's sort of a frenemy relationship there at times, but I've become very jaded in terms of believing at this point, some of our major journalists in Ottawa.
Well, good. We all should be. And I think that's why Juno News and the Bureau exist, because we're filling a need. I want to play one more clip of Kash Patel for you here, Sam. This one is talking about terrorists, known and suspected terrorists, crossing into the United States illegally from Canada. Let's play this clip.
Over 300 known or suspected terrorists crossed into this country last year illegally. Known or suspected terrorists, not illegals. Not just illegals, known or suspected terrorists. 85% of them came in through the northern border. Wow. This year, 100 known or suspected terrorists have crossed into this country illegally. 64 are south and north.
So this is something that I've reported on for a long time. So just back in November 2024, I was actually still on maternity leave, but I got these statistics. And so I published in True North. Let me just read what I wrote back in November. I write that 5 times more terrorists are coming from Canada. Canada is legitimately more of a threat to the United States' national security than Mexico. According to data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, since 2022, 1,155 individuals on terror watch lists were caught trying to enter the United States through its northern border, compared to just 199 from the south. Yes, you read that correctly. 5 times as many terrorists entered the United States through Canada than through Mexico since 2022. And what were those 1,155 terrorists doing in Canada in the first place? How did they get here? And how many more remain? And I asked a question of Trudeau. I said this is one of the things that he must answer for with his colossal failure of national security and immigration. And then, Sam, just this week, we heard another story of an ISIS man in Canada. This is a man pleads guilty after raising funds for ISIS under the guise of Gaza donations. A Toronto man has pleaded guilty to terrorism charges after, again, just pretending to raise money for aid victims in Gaza, but actually funneling the money to ISIS. Like, how on earth is this happening in Canada still, right? We were just talking about the Danforth shooter, and at that time, there were a lot of concerns of ISIS fighters fleeing Syria, like people who had gone over to fight over there and then just kind of snuck back into Canada and tried to pretend that nothing ever happened. And the Canadian authorities were aware of these individuals, but in many cases just allowed them to return back to their previous lives without any punishment. And it seems like it's still happening. It's so unbelievable. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, you're exactly right. For the Bureau, I've been reporting for 2 years now. Partly, one of my big files was there was a major compromise of passports in Hong Kong in the 1990s. What was revealed, according to a whistleblower, Brian McAdam, was that Chinese organized crime and intelligence had penetrated Canada's High Commission. There were concerns that Canadian officials corrupted, passports stolen, files of very serious people from organized crime altered to allow them to enter Canada. And so this has been going on for decades. Mr. McAdam's warnings were ignored. It all leads to circling back to Kash Patel's comments. I've reported that this convergence of Chinese organized crime, which is very close and sponsored by the Chinese Communist Party intelligence arms, works together with Latin American organized crime on smuggling across borders, on getting stolen passports to route people, let's just say the highest bidders from criminal networks, terror networks, human smugglers, know where to go to get passports to enter Canada because we're a weak spot. And beyond that, as my CBSA whistleblower alleged, there have been compromises within Canada's Border Services Agency and other agencies of these very same transnational organized crime groups. So why is Kash Patel saying Canada's northern border is a bigger threat for terrorists coming across? Exactly what I've been reporting on, these stunning, hard to believe criminal convergences that have infiltrated Canada's systems.
Well, it's a long-standing problem, right? Like, this dates back to pre 9/11. There's a woman named Yasmin Mohammed, and she's an incredible story. She's a podcaster and journalist based out in British Columbia. And she was the wife of a mastermind in the 9/11 attacks. And she moved to Canada in the 90s, unbeknownst to her that her husband was this crazy terrorist that was planning this awful attack. And basically, she found out who he was by U.S. CIA officials coming to her house. And she got out of a very bad situation. She turned her life around now and helps other people that are stuck in sort of crazy radicalized families and communities come out. But even the story of Omar Khadr, right? Like, his father also came to Canada, and he was also high up in Al Qaeda, friends with Osama bin Laden. Like, it's unbelievable that Canada has long been this playing ground for radical Islamist terrorists and others. And it's still happening, and we haven't figured out a way to stop it or crack down on it. I mean, I'm sorry that it takes the Americans coming in and saying, you have a major problem. But it's just unbelievable that Canada continues to allow this stuff to happen.
Largely, I think, a cultural issue, and I believe also a political corruption issue at the end of the day.
Interesting. Well, Sam Cooper, thank you so much for your time, your insights. Everyone go check out The Bureau on Substack. You should subscribe to support Sam's work. Sam, we always appreciate your time and insights on the program.
Likewise, glad to join you, Candice.
All right, folks, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is Candice Malcolm Show. We'll be back again tomorrow. Thank you and God bless.